and welcome to the Broken Sword. Today we are looking at the city known as Minas Morgul or Minas Ithil.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
Minas Morgul was once a great city of Gondor called Minas Ithil, but it was eventually taken over during the wars with Sauron by the forces of evil. But when did this happen? Or even, when was Minas Ithil even built? Well, let us have a look at the history of this city today. Okay, to start off we must go back into the Second Age of Middle-earth, back to the times of the Great Numenor, or at least to the endings of the times of Numenor, as it was after the downfall of this island when the first High King of the Dunedain, Elendil, came to Middle-earth. Once on these lands, he would come to found two kingdoms, one called Arnor in the north, and then also Gondor in the south. Elendil would have two sons, Anarion and Isildur. Anarion would establish the city of Minas Anor in the fiefdom of Anorion, and Isildur would establish the city of Minas Ithil in the fiefdom of Ithilien. And it was here, in Minas Ithil, that one of the Palantir that would have been brought by Elendil would be housed, and this stone would then be named the Ithil Stone. These stones would be used so that the lords may keep in contact with one another in the north and the south, basically like the Middle-earth version of a phone, but far cooler. Minas Ithil in its time would fall twice, and the first was in the Second Age. The battle that is known as the Fall of Minas Ithil took place in the year 3429 of the Second Age. Sauron had brought his forces out of Mordor to wage war, as, after Sauron had managed to survive the downfall of Numenor, he had wished for revenge against those others who had survived it too. Sauron had built up as much strength as he could and took a great force to drive Isildur out of his city. Once they managed to take the city, they would burn the white tree as a sign of disrespect. Now, the white tree had come from a fruit that Isildur had stolen from the original white tree called Nimloth that grew in Armenelos within Numenor. Isildur had suffered many wounds when taking on this mission to get the fruit, but when the first leaf had opened, his wounds magically healed. So really, it was a tree worth saving. Now, when Minas Ithil fell, Isildur managed to escape with his wife, his sons, and again he managed to save a sapling from the new white tree to take with him as well. They managed to flee to the north and reach Elendil, all while his brother Anarion was fighting back at Osgiliath to keep Sauron at bay. This attack was what sparked off the War of the Last Alliance, and after that war concluded in the year 3441, which also meant the end of the Second Age, Minas Ithil was restored and now stood as a watchtower. Now the time of Middle-earth would move on into the Third Age, and the Witch King of Angmar and his armies would be defeated at the Battle of Fornost, which took place within the Angmar War. Here he came up against Círdan, the Lord of the Havens from Lindon, Glorfindel, Lord of the Golden Flower from Rivendell, and Eomer, who at this time was the Prince of Gondor. This almighty team-up would be too much, and so from this, the Witch King would flee, and it tells of the next goings-on in Appendix A of The Lord of the Rings. It was thus in the reign of King Eonil, as later became clear, that the Witch King escaping from the north came to Mordor, and there gathered the other ringwraiths, of whom he was the chief. But it was not until 2000 that they issued from Mordor by the pass of Cirith Ungol and lay siege to Minas Ithil. This they took in 2002 and captured the Palantir of the Tower. They were not expelled while the Third Age lasted, and Minas Ithil became a place of fear and was renamed Minas Morgul. Many of the people that still remained in Ithilien deserted it. We can see why this victory for Sauron was a very important one. He managed to gain the Ithil Stone, his own Palantir to be able to keep watch on other goings-on in Middle-earth. It was after all this stone that meant he could influence the likes of the wizard Saruman and the steward of Gondor Denethor in later years. It was from this victory and occupation that Sauron now managed to send his foul creatures into the city, and this changed it. It became a foul and evil place, and its new name, Minas Morgul, means Tower of Dark Sorcery in the tongue of those in Gondor. So, because of this, many Gondorians fled from Ithilien in general, not being able to remain close to this now tainted land. Now, although the Witch King resided here, that does not mean he was done. There would be figures added to its bridges, carven with cunning in forms human and bestial, causing darkness to enter the minds of those that came close. It was these figures that almost drew Frodo to the gates when he, Sam and Gollum came close to it. But anyway, the Witch King would continue to turn this land rotten and demented. However, he always wished for payback for his loss in the Battle of Fornost. So, after biding his time for a few years, the Witch King would then twice challenge the now King of Gondor, King Eärnur. Eärnur had held the crown only 7 years when the Lord of Morgul repeated his challenge, taunting the king that to the faint heart of his youth he had now added the weakness of age. Then Mardil could no longer restrain him, and he rode with a small escort of knights to the gate of Minas Morgul. None of that riding were ever heard of again. It was believed in Gondor that the faithless enemy had trapped the king, and that he had died in torment in Minas Morgul. But since there were no witnesses of his death, Mardil the Good Steward ruled Gondor in his name for many years. Over the next few hundred years, there is not much of note. This period, after all, was called the Watchful Peace in the histories, as at this time the powers of the enemy were sitting and hiding in silence, building their strength. The ruler of Minas Morgul at this time was the only other Nazgul that we really know anything about, and that is the one known as Khamul the Easterling. It was during this time that the lords of Morgul had started to breed in secret the Uruk-hai, with these new horrific creatures described as black orcs of great strength. It would be from here that a new attack on Gondor would come out, being in the year 2475, so now 425 years after Eärnur had rode through its gates. This attack was when they managed to ruin Osgiliath, breaking its stone bridges and taking control of much of Ithilien. And an interesting point here is that this attack happened in the last years of Denethor I as steward, who had a son called Boromir, just as father and son would be named over 500 years later at the times of the War of the Ring, but not to be confused with them. Talking of which, this city would then remain quiet again until the time of the War of the Ring was now in its throes, but the evil would never lessen. In fact, we get a good description of the city from the perspective of Frodo and Sam in the chapter of the Stairs of Cirith Ungol in The Lord of the Rings. A long tilted valley, a deep gulf of shadow ran back far into the mountains. Upon the further side, some way within the valley's arms, high on a rocky seat upon the black knees of the Efel Duath, stood the walls and tower of Minas Morgul. All was dark about it, earth and sky, but it was lit with light. Not the imprisoned moonlight welling through the marble walls of Minas Ithil long ago, tower of the moon, fair and radiant in the hollow of the hills. Paler indeed than the moon ailing in some slow eclipse was the light of it now, wavering and blowing like a noisome exhalation of decay and corpse light, a light that illuminated nothing. In the walls and tower windows showed, like countless black holes looking inwards into emptiness. But the topmost course of the tower revolved slowly, first one way and then another, a huge ghostly head leering into the night. You can tell from this description just how gruesome this place now was. But anyway, now it was time for Sauron to launch his attack, and so the rest of the host of Minas Morgul was sent to siege Minas Tirith, as it had just been used as a base to grow an army at this point. This was also the host that Frodo, Sam and Gollum witnessed during their climb of the Straight Stair, followed by the Winding Stair. Most of us know though that this host would be wiped out at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, meaning there was now no one within the city to defend it. With this battle won, Aragorn and Gandalf led an army to the Black Gate as a distraction tactic to help Frodo and Sam, and on their way they rode to the entrance of the Morgul Vale. They could feel the lifeless evil that came from it, despite no more servants of the enemy remaining here, and so they made the decision to stop it from being accessible to anyone. Yet the air of the valley was heavy with fear and enmity. Then they broke the evil bridge and set red flames in the noisome fields and departed. After their victory was achieved and the war was over, King Elessar made Faramir the Prince of Ithilien. Aragorn would ask Faramir to remain living within sight of Minas Tirith and not attempt to retake Minas Morgul, as Aragorn says to him, "Minas Ithil in Morgul Vale shall be utterly destroyed, and though it may in time to come be made clean, no man may dwell there for many long years." So although in time there may have been a wish for the city to be restored to the days when it was the great Minas Ithil, it is never known if the evil that once tainted it had finally faded, or if it was simply just left to crumble until the land took it back. So there we have it, the story of Minas Ithil, how it became Minas Morgul and was then left empty from its corruption. It is a city that had managed to be so glorious in its days as a city of Gondor, having marble walls that caused the city to shine white, large meadows upon its banks, just generally a beautiful city, probably the closest to that of something of Numenor within Middle-earth. Then it turned into one of the most fearful and evil places when Sauron got his hands on it. The Witch King tainted it, so no longer would it shine white, no longer would it have luscious banks of flowers. Now it would just be sick, poisonous air floating around evil, rotting walls. A truly gruesome place. Although I will be very interested to see if we get to see any sign of the early glorious Minas Ithil form in the Rings of Power show, even if it most likely won't happen until the later seasons. Either way, it has been fun looking at a specific city for today's video. So I hope you all enjoyed this video for today, but now it is time for my question for you all, which is, when King Eomer rode to meet the Witch King, he was never seen again or confirmed dead or alive at any point. But what do you think his fate was? A long and slow, tortured life instead of death? Or was he maybe even stabbed with a Morgul blade and turned into a Wraith slave? Or something else entirely? There are many fan theories about this, and I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and opinions on what you think in the comment section below. And now firstly, to finish off, I'd like to quickly mention our other channels that will all be linked in the description below if you'd like to check them out, and of course now to shout out our patrons. Firstly, we have our Divine Power tier members of Kevin, Abram and Matt. You are all awesome, and a big thanks to our Fire Demon tier members of Nashith, Denversteel and Gregory, and as well I cannot forget the Wizard Staff tier members of John, Andrew, Bill, Evil Chameleon, Jennifer and Finrod Felagund as well. Every single one of you is a true legend of the Brohirrim. Finally, if you have managed to reach the very end of this video with me today and you have enjoyed what you've seen, then please hit that subscribe button and the bell icon too, as well as dropping a like on the video, as these things can massively help the channel grow. So thank you once again if you have managed to reach the very end of this video with me, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.